CDF team, we strong. CDF team strong. Whenever I come to this place, I come and I get chills. And when I walked up on the stage, I got chills because there is so much in this space. There's so much in this room. And we miss Marion so very much. We miss her voice. And I can't, pastor, I can't understand that. You know, I can't understand why this time, and then maybe she just needed to rest. But I want to start with just saying, and I'm coming to what I'm supposed to be doing. I always do this. I was walking with Marion one of the last times she was at the farm. And we were walking out and looking at this Noah's Ark. And I said to somebody the other day, Olivia, if anybody tells me there's an ark, I'm headed to it, because in these times, I never know. But we were walking, and I said, Marion, look what you've done. And she said, I didn't do any of this. I am. She said, God did this. And I said, this is your legacy. And she said to me, my legacy is freedom schools. And that just says a lot about who we are and why we are and how we come to be where we are. My job is to introduce Karen Pittman, who was leaving CDF as I was coming, and was coming to the Clinton administration as I was leaving. So somehow there's a connection. I got Karen's bio, but as I was reading it, I decided to Google you. And carrying forward from what Olivia was talking about, it took me back to a tagline that CDF once had, that children don't come in pieces. That everything about a child, as Olivia talked about, is important. And in Karen's work at the Forum for Youth Justice, the conversation about how do we take those incremental steps and move that money in one direction. And Marion's thing about always keeping the baby in the center of the table, and how we blend those resources together as we do this incremental stuff, that so that the children get the whole dose of whatever they need to be able to unleash the joy in growing up, which I'm getting. Karen Pittman is our CDF Advocate for Joy. She is co-founder and a pioneering leader in youth development. She served as the president and CEO of the Forum for Youth Investment until 2021, after which time she transitioned to a senior fellow role, dedicating her time and expertise to thought leadership. Karen's career is marked by the creation of organizations and initiatives that champion youth development. She co-founded the Forum for Youth Investment in 1998 with its Marita, I knew I was going to do that, Irby. And under their leadership, the Forum has become a trusted national action tank, which is very different from a think tank. The Forum integrates youth development, policy, and practice with on-the-ground training and support, all with the goal of ensuring that all young people are prepared for college, work, and life. Her journey began at the Urban Institute, which we all know in light clasp we use in the field, the information that comes from those two premier organizations, conducting research on social services for children and families. She joined the Children's Defense Fund in the 1980s, where she led the establishment of its adolescent policy agenda, including launching initiatives for pregnancy prevention. She later founded and directed the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research at the Academy for Educational Development, which further expanded into the National Training Institute for Community Youth Work. In 1995, Karen joined the Clinton administration as director of the President's Crime Prevention Council, where she coordinated efforts across 13 cabinet departments to advance a prevention agenda. Her expertise was further utilized at the International Youth Foundation, where she helped shape program content and evaluation strategies before co-founding America's Promise with General Colin Powell. You all remember people like Colin Powell? Think we can ever find them again? Karen has authored numerous books and articles on youth development and policy, and her voice has been influential through her regular columns in Youth Today. She serves on many boards and panels, including the Turnaround for Children Board and the Aspen Institute's National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. She has earned numerous accolades, including the National Commission for African American Education, Augustus F. Hawkins Service Award, and the American Youth Policy Forum's Decade of Service Award for sustained visionary leadership in advancing youth policy. Please join me in welcoming Karen Pittman, our CDF Advocate for Joy awardee.
It's really wonderful to be here. I'm old. You can tell by that resume I'm old. And coming to the Haley Farm was on my bucket list, so thank you. Olivia talked about how she wrote a speech on the plane. She talked about how she thought about what she was going to say for a long time, but started writing yesterday. I started writing on the bus from the center of the museum this morning. These are my notes. So, because I just wanted to see you and see what comes to me. The first word on my list says pregnant. I was at the Urban Institute. I was finishing a book called Testing the Social Safety Net. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was thinking, when I come back, do I come back to the Urban Institute, or do I go someplace where I can actually see what the power of my research does or doesn't do? I was a good researcher, I still am a good researcher, but writing reports and then sending them out into the air, I want to follow them and see if it's written it the right way to inspire people, what they're doing with it. And so I was thinking to do something different. I wish I had the job description in my hand, but I don't. But I saw a job description from CDF. People don't usually apply for jobs when they're 7 months pregnant. For some reason, I thought, what the heck? This looks like something I could really do. Because the year before I started writing this book, I had written a piece on sex education. We did a big study on sex education in the public schools. And I thought, well, she's talking about adolescent pregnancy, but she doesn't really want a health person. Let me go talk to her. So I went in as a long shot. I really didn't think I was going to get hired 7 months pregnant. I went into Marion's office. The first thing she did was she looked at my ankles and she said, put your feet up. That's not good. Put your feet up. So I sat there with her for an hour and a half with my feet up, and we talked. And she said, I want somebody who knows what to do with this fact. I got up a couple weeks ago, and the Washington Post said, across the front page, more than half of the babies born to black women are born out of wedlock. And I thought, what is that about? And then I read further down in the article, and I heard almost 90% of babies born to black teenagers are born out of wedlock. What is going on, she said. I want to do something about this. I said, well, I'm a sociologist. I'm not a health person. Why aren't you hiring a public health person? She said, I don't want a public health person. I want somebody who can figure out how to understand what this problem is. And so we talked longer, and I said, all right, I'm up for this. She graciously allowed me to go home and have the baby, but promised that I would come back. Timothy is now 40 years old, so that's how long ago it was. But when I came back, I came in thinking I was going to start working on this adolescent pregnancy stuff, and on my desk was a stack of data about that thick, literally. And she said, "You're smart and you write well, and I want you to do something with this data. I know you're going to do teen pregnancy, but before you do that, could you do something with this? I know there's something in this data, and I've given it to a couple people and they haven't made it sync. Could you do something?" So for the first month, I sat there looking through so much data. And out of that came a book called Black and White Children Key Facts, in which my approach to figuring out how to have this data sing, and I actually have a cover of it framed, was to say, black and white children key facts. Black children are 20 times more, 10 times more, 7 times more. And I just went down that way, and it was a pyramid on the back of the chart to really make people understand what's behind the data. And then we organized it in the book. And she said, "All right, I've got something here." This is Marianne saying, "I've got something here, so I want you to keep doing that with this pregnancy thing." Now, I was in charge of adolescent pregnancy policy, prevention policy. I was not allowed to go to the Hill. Why not? Because at that point, if you were advocating adolescent pregnancy, you were talking about contraception. Mary's like, that's not where we're starting. So I had to quickly figure out, how am I the policy director for adolescent pregnancy prevention when I can't go to the Hill and I can't lead with contraception? And I have to make friends with the people in public health. One of my dearest friends, who's no longer with us, is Joy Dreyfus, who at that point was at the Alan Guttmacher Institute. I didn't know Joy. When I got on the train, I went to New York, and I said, "I need to talk to you. There's a problem here. We've got to figure out how we do it together. I'm not your enemy, but CDF is not going to come out, first and foremost, for contraception. We're not going to come out for abortion, certainly. We're not going to come out about contraception, but we have to figure out what this story is." And out of that meeting with her came the idea of capacity and motivation. Young people can have the capacity to prevent pregnancy, but pregnancy as a problem is different from any other problem, because at some point you do want to get pregnant. You can say, don't use drugs, don't be in a gang. You can say all those things that you don't want, but at some point you really do want young people to flip over and say, now is the time for me to start a family. How do you know when that happens? So we started this phrase, capacity and motivation, and we began talking about the motivation side. So again, we did studies. Paul Smith was down the hall doing his magic on an Atari computer. I'm so old, but really, an Atari computer, this guy would crank out genius stuff on an Atari computer. I was so impressed that I finally got an Atari computer in my office. The printer was so slow, you would turn it on and go to lunch. Seriously, you would. You'd turn it on, and you'd go to lunch, and you'd come back, and your paper would be printed on the perforated paper that you then ripped apart. You all don't know what you have now. But I went to Paul and I said, there's a story here we have to be able to tell. And so we did. We said, well, we're looking at this data about black young women, or black teens, or all their babies are out of wedlock, but let's back it up. So when we backed it up, we found, well, black teens are only 1.1 times more likely to have sex. They're 1.5 times more likely to have unprotected sex. They're then 2 times more likely to get pregnant. Then it escalates. So why is that? How do we tell that story? Because it's not that they're just promiscuous. If there's a rationality in this story, we have to find the rationality. And that rationality came from motivation. So I went back to the Urban Institute, found a partner there who was doing research on teens, and I said, why don't we go out and find out? So we went out and we did scenarios with young people. We went into schools and we said, take these scenarios, tell us who's going to get pregnant. Scenario 1, you've got the high school football player who's going to get a college scholarship. You've got the cheerleader who's going to get a college scholarship. You're clearly you ask the question, are they having sex? Of course they're having sex. You ask the question, are they using contraception? Of course using contraception. What would happen if they got pregnant? You got that answer. You went through those different scenarios, and the young people very accurately predicted who was having sex, who was having unprotected sex, who was getting pregnant, what would they do if they got pregnant. So pregnancy is really, once you start to have sex, unwed pregnancy is an inevitable space unless you make decisions. And so we started digging into where the rational decision-making is happening. Well, that went on for a while. Anyhow, the next part of the story is, once I finished Black and White Children Key Facts, and had to think about how am I going to get policy decisions being made about pregnancy without talking about pregnancy. We started the Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Policy Series. And every 2 months, I would write, I used to call it the Adolescent Pregnancy and series. I'd go to one of the policy directors and say, how does adolescent pregnancy affect your job? Adolescent pregnancy and child welfare, adolescent pregnancy and education, adolescent pregnancy and youth employment, adolescent pregnancy and childcare. I went around CVS walls. At that point, everybody had an office on the outside. And I sat down, and every 2 months, we put a policy paper out that talked about the connection between teen pregnancy and the policy work that was going on. And that's how I got adolescent pregnancy into policy. So I was thinking all the things Olivia just said about how we move our work. And I was thinking, yesterday I was in Minneapolis, and I was with one who was talking about the power of ideas. And Marian is absolutely visionary in her ability to say, this is an idea, and as Olivia said, this is the incremental things we have to do to get to that idea. But how do we know that we have to take enough time to make sure the idea is right? Because incremental things are fine, but you can put so much power into something incremental if you're really clear about where the idea is, where it's going. And so, to finish the story, I did the rounds with teen pregnancy prevention. In the course of it, Marian said, go out and not assign yourself. What are you good at? Go out and do it. Well, I was good at talking to people. I was good at telling stories with data. I was good at bringing the qualitative and the quantitative together. And so I started going around the country giving speeches about teen pregnancy prevention, this new capacity and motivation way to think about it. And that was having traction. And wherever I would go to have a speech, I would go visit a program. And they were all teen pregnancy programs, because at that point people were getting money for teen pregnancy prevention. And so I said, well, what are you doing here? And they would say, well, what we're really doing is we're meeting people, young people, we're helping them have promise, we're helping them do these things. Are we calling it pregnancy prevention? Yes. But what we're really doing is this. And by the end of that tour of a couple years, remember I drew my first graphic. I like to draw pictures. I drew a donut, which stayed with me for years. And I basically had all the problems as little bites in the donut. You know, think of a donut with a hole in the middle. And I had slides of it. I eventually made a video of it. But you've got delinquency, dropout, substance abuse, HIV at that point. All the problems as a slices of the donut. And in the middle is core supports and opportunities. The positive youth development movement was launched at CDF because I had the opportunity, thanks to Marian, to go around the country and talk to people who were running programs under the guise of getting money to prevent a problem, but who were doing what you all are doing at your freedom schools, who were giving young people joy and agency and letting them be creative. And they were saying, if I have to get the money by saying I'm doing pregnancy prevention, that's fine. If that fad goes away and I have to get the money saying I'm doing dropout prevention, that's fine. You change the problem, I'm going to do the same thing for my kids. So, when the time came for CDF to hire a new education director, I sat down with Paul Smith and I said, Paul, I think it's time. I think it's time for CDF to change its education strategy. It's no longer about education access. It's got to be about educational agency. Paul said, I think you're right. So all this youth development stuff I've been doing, talking about problem-free and fully prepared, thinking about how we change the mindsets, not just of policymakers, but change the mindsets of the public to think about this, how do we do this differently? So I went into Marian and I said, Marian, I'm going to apply for the education job. She said, really? I said, yeah, Marian, I'm going to apply for the education job. And here's why. I know we have access issues, but over the past 4 or 5 years that I've been here, 6 years at that point, we've moved into the adolescent space. We've moved from children to adolescents. Now we're doing youth employment. We started the idea about young families. We're moving into that space, and adolescents are demonized in this country. All we do is talk about their problems. If we can't change education, we're never going to change that. I'm going to be the director of education because I want to bring education and youth development together. Marian said, I agree with you, but the country's not ready for it. This is their incrementalism. She said, we have to go to the Hill to get what we can out of what's there now. But she did say, she didn't say assign yourself, that wasn't her phrase then, but she said, I believe in you, go off and make it happen. You have to go off and make that reality happen. So I did. I went off and set up a set of youth development and policy research, and for 10 years I figured out how you take the research that we know about youth development and slowly moved into policy. We're successful, but it took 10 years. In 2008, we finally got the Federal Interagency Group on youth programs that wrote an official definition of positive youth development. We went from having nothing in the language to the idea of youth development and youth assets in federal language, to talk about how young people need to have social and emotional competencies. All this language is there now that wasn't there before. Policies still aren't great, but the mindset is slowly shifting. So when I think about Marion, and I think about my career, again, had I been in any other organization, I would not have had the freedom to use my gifts to figure out how to help change mindsets, how to use research to change mindsets, how to use words to change mindsets. And I'm still doing that now. And I thank Marion for all that. And I thank her for sending me away. Really, because I wouldn't have been happy being the education director at that time when I knew what was needed was we needed to rethink education. So now I'm 73 years old. Now, finally, we are in a position to really rethink education. I'm spending my time with educators now, with the Association of School Superintendents, with people who have every name in their title you can think of. Education Reimagined, Execute Education, Education Remake Learning, it's on my phone. All these organizations that are saying, we now understand that we have to take education to a different place. We have to have a new architecture for education. And my challenge to them, just as I'm thinking about Mary when I do this, is, all right, we've gotten you there. 20 years ago, when we started talking about positive youth development, that was a strategy to help kids that were at risk, high risk. It was allowed. We moved things forward with them. We were allowed to talk about social emotional competencies. We were allowed to talk about joy and caring. We were allowed to talk about helping young people find their gifts if they'd already failed. You were given the leeway to do that. But schools didn't pick that up. Schools didn't let it inside the classroom walls. Now they understand that what they're doing inside the classroom isn't working for young people, any young people. And it certainly has never worked for our young people. So last year, with my colleague Rita Irby, who co-founded the forum with me, we are now in something called Knowledge to Power Catalyst, a little nimble consulting firm. No staff, just us. We wrote a paper called Too Essential to Fail, because our public education system is really on the verge of failure. It's at a tipping point. If more people walk away from it and take their dollars away from it, we're not going to be able to recover. We can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. So my charge to you all is freedom schools where young people feel joy have to be brought into the equation. 50 years ago, we know that we had to help young people who were, at that point, integrating schools. They had to have a space to recover when they came back from that experience. You had to hold them, you had to protect them, you had to say, all right, you're doing God's work going in. When you come back, we're going to help you heal. We now need to bring that spirit into schools, and they're willing to have us do that, but we have to come sit at the table. We have to bring our messages in there. We have to bring our strategies in there. It's not good enough for us to say we're helping young people combat summer learning loss. We really have to say we are the solution. We have the solution to what young people need, and we're going to help you, schools, figure out how you use your public dollars to do this work. So I want your help. I know I've got Marion's back now, because when I saw her 5 or 6 years ago, she acknowledged it took longer than we thought, but we've gotten to a place where we really can imagine differently. We've got the science of adolescence telling us, incredible science that tells us young people are so resilient, we can undo enormous harm up until age 25. The brain is still forming. Young people by design are risk takers. They need to be positive risk takers, but they are risk takers. They need new experiences. And our young people in particular need this freedom to be able to find joy in their lives and move forward. And they need the meaning-making skills to understand what's happening to them. It's not enough just to give them good experiences. They also have to understand why bad experiences are happening to them. We can do this for our young people. And so when I think about what happens next in this work, for me, what happens is we take the moment that we have right now, when people are really trying to rethink education, they're using words that they hadn't used before. SEL as an acronym has been demonized, but people are talking about competencies. How do we help people be competent? How do we help them have real life skills? How do we give them community? The term ecosystem wasn't used at all 10 years ago. Now everybody's talking about how do we build healthy ecosystems for young people? How do you talk about learning ecosystems for young people? We need to figure out how we protect the core functions of public education. Universal free access. The opportunity to have good instruction. The opportunity to have tracked attendance. Attendance can be punitive, but attendance is also important. Parents can't go to work unless they know their young people are safe and protected. I don't just want them to walk out the door. I want them to walk out the door and somebody's going to call me if they don't get where they're going. Attendance is important, a part of how young people can go to work. So we need universal access, we need attendance, we need instruction, we need achievement tracking progress, and we need somebody to certify that young people have the skills and competencies that they need to succeed. All those are things that we need to have. All those are things that the public believes are important. Nobody likes the way they're currently being done. So the question is, how do we take the public opinion out there that's right now that is hugely convergent, that says we want schools to be different and maintain those functions while we revamp the schools? The answer to that, for me, is you all. And the organizations in this country that, because they are not hampered by seat time, by the academic standards, but the things that we know take the joy out of young people's lives, you're putting that joy in, but you're not doing it for credit. This is the moment. This is the moment in which we help young people get credit for learning that matters. This is the moment that we do that. We have to do that by making the box bigger. If school is 9 to 3, September to June, K to 12, only relevant for kids who stay in school. Once you leave school, you're gone, you disappear. We want that box to be pre-K to 25, year-round, flexible day for every young person of every status. Graduate, dropout, whatever. That's what the science tells us is possible. That's what we need to do. And when we make that box bigger, what we do is we let all the organizations in the community that are doing learning for young people to stand up and say, we have solutions. That's our job. And so when I think what I want CDF to do, that's what I want CDF to do. I want you to really dig into that core sense that young people have joy and agency and bring that into the limelight. And bring your advocacy skills, bring your organizing skills, bring your youth engagement skills into this space. But recognize that this is the moment in time not to be incremental and say we can do it in the summer. This is the moment in time to say we have to do it all the time. That's what I want. And so let me see if I've got any words left on my page that I didn't say before I sit down. My keyword list. Nope, I've done it all. Oh, yeah. I didn't say that the phrase that I'm most known for that I actually made up at CDF after making that donut is problem-free isn't fully prepared. Problem-free isn't fully prepared. When I was at CDF, the policy legislation was getting young people up to policy problem-free. We were successful if we got them to be not on drugs, not in gangs, not violent, not dropouts, not pregnant. And so I started going around the country saying to people in audiences, all right, I'm going to say, here's Alicia. She's 19. She's not on drugs. She's not a dropout. She's not pregnant. She's not in a gang. Will you hire her? What would you say to that? Will you hire her? Is she prepared? What can she do? You told me what she didn't do. That's great. I'm glad she did that. But what can she do? We have got to invest in our young people. We have to understand the data that says for every year a young person is in school, engagement levels decrease. Every kindergarten comes to school engaged. By fifth grade, only 75% of them say they're engaged. By middle school, 50%. By high school, it's under 30%, and that's only for the ones who are still in high school. So it's not enough for us to look for access in our schools and our public systems. We have got to make sure young people in those buildings have a sense of agency and joy. And I hope I can do that with you. Thank you.